Angel Studios, the only streaming service that leaves you better than it found you. 80% of films in Hollywood fail. We think we can flip that on its head. And they've finally got to the point where they just admitted, they just said, we just make movies for the 10%. We want to make movies for the other 90%.
I mean, I gotta ask, how do you do this? Like, how do you work with your siblings?
Many of the big studios were started by brothers. To some extent, it feels like we kind of stumbled into this space. We have this window of opportunity. I don't know how long it is, but that window could close very quickly.
It's exactly how we feel here at PragerU. Right now is the time to put your foot on the gas. This is going to be my fun episode because so many of my episodes are about warnings and issues, and this is going to be the fun one because I have one of the angels here with me at PragerU. So, Jordan, welcome to PragerU. It's so good to have you here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I am so curious about Angel Studios, how you guys built this incredible organization and what the future holds for you and your brothers. Before we get started, I want to just get to know you. Tell me about yourself and your background. How did you become one of the main competitors against Hollywood?
Man, there's a short answer to that. And there's a really long answer to that. The short answer is, I grew up in Burley, Idaho with my brothers, where we grew up as potato farmers. And so I learned how to work, and I learned that I didn't want to be a potato farmer. It's a very different occupation. But as we were growing up, we grew up in a big family, and then we started getting married and having kids, and we have big families. My wife just had our 6th child, which we're very excited about. In 2010 through 2012, we were having many conversations around movies and storytelling. Because if you look at kind of that era, that was the era that Netflix started launching, House of Cards, and Game of Thrones was just starting to launch. And so there was all these TV shows that were coming out that for us, although was extremely compelling storytelling for, the world, everybody's like, well, this is really great storytelling. It did not reflect our values at all. Like it didn't look like what I wanted culture. Because anybody who's studied the entertainment space and storytelling, you realize that the stories that are predominantly told today is what culture is going to look like in 20, 30 years. I'm like, I don't really want my world to look like Game of Thrones in 20, 30 years. So yeah, we had done a bunch of other different businesses throughout our lives. And so we had no intention we were always entrepreneurial, but we had no intention of doing anything in the entertainment space. I mean, I remember as kids, we would start little companies my brother Jeff had this idea of getting 50-pound boxes of potatoes from my uncles off the potato farm. We loaded them into a giant 15-passenger van that we took all the seats out of, drove it to Utah, and then we'd go door to door selling, 50-pound boxes of potatoes for $20. And that's how we paid for, colleges and things that we were doing and stuff. And so we always had that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And that was more out of necessity of just the fact that my parents didn't have a lot of resources growing up. And so entrepreneurship was never a question for me. Like that's going to happen regardless. But to some extent, it feels like we kind of stumbled into this space. That was not really the path that we were thinking we would go. I started a company called Cove, which was a DIY home security company that we built into almost $100 million company. And that was a great experience, but it wasn't this. Like it was, you're protecting people's homes and families in terms of home security, but it's not entertainment in the same way. But so in 2012, my brother Neil, he basically had this idea where he said, if we can somehow create a product that will allow us to gather like-minded people into a community that gets large enough, we'll then be able to launch into original content. And the product he thought of was what we called at the time VidAngel. And some people may be familiar with that. It's still a great product. My wife and I use it every week. But VidAngel was this idea that we wanted to give parents the control of being able to skip and mute anything that they found objectionable in their content. And so Neil built the first prototype of that. He and I, in his basement, started working on what that would look like in terms of the business and the business model. We spent 6 months building it out until we had the first working product. I remember coming home from an event and Neil's like, Jordan, check it out. Look at this. And he had this, screen up on his laptop, and he had built basically the first filter for one of our favorite films, which is Cinderella Man. And he did that because he wanted to be able to show his son that film, but he didn't want his son to go repeating to his sisters all the words that the coach of that film says to, when they're in those boxing matches. He wanted to, there's one scene in that movie that was really important to him. And it was a scene where his son steals something because they're starving. If you've ever seen the movie Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe. And at the end, the dad pulls him aside and he says, "Son, we don't steal in our family." And he said that was such an impactful moment for him. He's like, I want to show my son that, but I want him to see all the other stuff.
Right.
So he clicks play, and it was the boxing sequence with Russell Crowe at the end of the movie, and the coach is swearing, and it was muting out the parts where this coach swearing. We're like, oh my gosh, we have a product here. This is great. And so that's what launched VidAngel, and it started growing very rapidly. Matter of fact, by 2015, 2016, we were growing at a faster pace than Netflix was at its same time period in its life cycle. And the ultimate goal was to build a large audience so that we could launch original content and start telling stories at the same quality as Hollywood, but that were going to amplify light, that were going to have values that reflected what we wanted for what I believe I want the world to look like for my kids and my grandkids. And so that was kind of the stumbling through into this industry that kind of happened. And it was this multi-year process before we really, really got into it. But it was, I think there's, many factors of why God led us into this. But yeah, I mean, that's the medium-sized story.
So none of you have a degree in film, or it's not that you've made one film and said, okay, now I'm a film guru, so I'm going to support additional, none of that stuff.
No, I've got a degree in computer science. My brother's got a degree in business and marketing, Jeff. Neil got a degree in a master's degree in instructional engineering, I believe, of some sort. And then he taught, so I can't remember if that's the exact degree, but then he taught himself how to code. And so this is not even remotely, now we love stories. I think everybody's built to love stories.
Sure.
But film and entertainment was not really on the pipeline of this is what we want to do. We didn't even think about it that way. We didn't grow up with a TV. And when we finally got a TV, we didn't have TV on the TV. We would hook a hanger up to the back of the antenna and we could finally get PBS.
That's what turned you into the hustler you are, right?
It's how do we get a channel on this
selling
thing?
Potatoes, having to hang things, right? That's how it works.
But we, my parents selected a few movies that we probably got once we actually had a TV and a VHS player. And the movies I remember watching that I just fell in love with was It's a Wonderful Life. It's my favorite movie of all time. Really an entrepreneur story to some extent. To a large extent, and any average person's story, if you look at it, it's so meaningful. And so those films still played a part in who I am, but it wasn't like I watched that film and went, I'm going to be,
right,
heading up a studio. That was not even, it never even came to my mind.
But it's amazing because the movies you mention are ones that bring the family together. It sounds like you would just spend a lot of time with your family and watch these movies together, where so many of the movies that are created now in Hollywood are for such not just niche audiences, but a niche segment of your household, right? And so the assumption is that every child has their own iPad and everybody is sitting in a different space consuming content, where at Angel, I feel like aside from the values, the common thread that I have seen is that these are movies that you want to sit together with the entire family, the siblings, the parents, the grandparents. And so it's probably a part of that formative experience that you had with your family. And now you're working with your siblings on this company. And so I mean, I got to ask, because I'm sure many people are wondering, how do you do this? How do you work with your siblings?
Yeah. I think there were some interesting formative things that happened when we were younger. And one of them was, because my parents had very little money and my dad lost his farm very early on, and we ended up working for farmers, we ended up, for a lot of our life, actually being homeschooled. And we had to be homeschooled out of necessity because we needed to go help around the house and around the different businesses that my parents and I and our siblings would try to start and get going. And so from a very young age, we were working together as siblings, working side by side. I remember one trip we really wanted to do. We wanted to go travel and do a road trip from Idaho all the way through to the East Coast and back. We wanted to do this drive, but we didn't have the resources for it. And so we spent the entire summer working for my uncle, hoeing beets. What hoeing beets is basically you got 2 to 3 rows on each side of you, and there's all the beets, and you have to go through with a hoe and chop out and either thin the beets if they're too thick and compacted together, or pull out the weeds that are around there. And so you go up and down the rows for hours and hours every day, and you get paid, so much per row. So we did that the entire summer, all of us as siblings, so we could earn up money together to then go on this trip out to the East Coast. And so those experiences, I think were really formative in allowing us to communicate with each other and like actually have meaningful conversations and meaningful disagreements. Like we had our fair share of fights, many fights as siblings. But those experiences, I think, is what allowed us to come out of that and be really good at working together as a team, because, my mom always focused on the importance of communicating what you're feeling, talking about what you're feeling, communicating what you're feeling. And so it allowed us to, now we probably over communicate. we talk a little bit too much, but my wife's like, you say too much. Like, right. Maybe don't communicate as much. But anyway, so it's, those type of experiences growing up allowed us to work together. And I think it's become a superpower because we know each other so well. We can be in a really heated exchange about something in terms of the future of Angel or a product or whatever it is. And then we can walk out and go to lunch and be laughing. And we've had many people who talk to us who are just like, how do you guys, like employees who come into the company sometimes, they'll see us go and, we don't, we get along most of the time, but every once in a while have a heated exchange. They're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? What's going to happen? Like, yeah. And then all of a sudden we're, laughing in the corner and they're like, weren't they just like arguing, 5 minutes ago? And right. So that's become a superpower. But if you look at the entertainment industry, I didn't know this, growing up, but many of the big studios were started by brothers, Warner Brothers, the Disney Brothers. And so there's something about, and many of the Fortune 500 companies have been started by families in some way, shape or form, the Waltons. There's example after example after example. And so I think there's a superpower to having the ability to work with your family as long as you can communicate and articulate what you need.
It's so true because people get so overwhelmed by friction, right? They'll see the friction, but actually the frictions are what create sparks, and the sparks are what create innovation. And so you need to be able to push against each other and be comfortable enough to know, okay, we're going to have this disagreement on whatever business issue it is, and we'll just get over it and move on. Where I guess in many corporate environments, people are just so afraid to speak. But, with siblings, I guess you can just always punch each other and get over it.
Yeah.
Right?
And one of the things we even tell people in the office is we have what's called the Scalia-Ginsburg rule, which basically, for those who are familiar, Scalia and Ginsburg, they were both on the Supreme Court. They had totally different opinions on how things should be handled, and they would argue and discuss, and they'd go through their rulings, and then they would leave and they would go to dinner together. And everybody said they were just best friends outside the courtroom. In the courtroom, it's really heated friendship, but outside they were having these conversations. And so what we tell people at Angel is, you can talk about politics, religion, whatever you want, if you do it face to face. Can't do it over Slack or over text message or over email or social media, because then you start disconnecting who the person is from the face and who they are. And so that Scalia-Ginsburg rule has allowed us to have better communication in the company and people to actually express what they're feeling and what they're talking about. And we're not perfect at it. Like we're far from perfect. Yeah. But that type of dialogue is so important.
Yeah, that's very cool. So Angel Studios now has a unique model to it. You guys are kind of different. Can you just explain how this works and what is the Angels Guild and what is the whole concept of Angels?
Yeah, I think to really understand the Angel Guild, it's probably good to take a couple steps back. When we went into original content with our first series, which was Dry Bar Comedy, which is now the largest library stand-up comedy in the world. And we basically, we were forced to really rely on our community and our crowd for saving the company. Because in 2016, the VidAngel software that we had put together a business plan, and we had sent it to the studios and said, this is what we're doing. Let us know if you have any concerns. They never gave us any feedback. And so we kind of went forward, 6 to 12 months and continued that business plan. But in 2016, I think they saw our growth trajectory and where we were going. And so Disney, Warner Brothers, and 20th Century Fox and Lucasfilm sued us. And that was was a really hard day because, I looked up to the entrepreneurial acumen of the Disney brothers and different people the storytellers of, bygones, and was like, man, now these companies that I've admired in some respect throughout their history are coming after us. And so that was a gruesome lawsuit. But when that happened,
what was the lawsuit about? What did they sue you for?
Basically, they didn't love that VidAngel was the software. What we were doing is we were basically buying and housing all the physical DVDs. And then we were creating the ability for people to actually come and stream. They could buy the DVD from our warehouse, even though it'd stay in the warehouse. And then they could stream that just like they would on Vudu or anything else, and skip and mute anything they wanted through streaming. And then they could actually have us send the DVD to them if they wanted, or they could sell it back to us if they didn't want it anymore. And so they basically sued us over DMCA stuff. But we felt we had a really compelling argument around fair use and why this would be important. And without getting into the nitty gritty of that, we went to our community and we said, hey, this is happening. And they said, we want you guys to continue. We want to donate to the lawsuit. We're like, you want to donate to a lawsuit? Are you guys nuts? Like, we can't find one time that a startup has survived a Disney lawsuit. And so, but they sent us donations like $300,000 over 5 months. And that sounds great, but that's about 2.5 weeks of legal fees when you're in a Disney lawsuit.
Yeah.
And so right during that time, there was this thing called the Jobs Act that passed, which allowed for small companies to do equity crowdfunding. And so we went to our community and said, hey, we're probably going to die, but we will fight this to the end if you guys want us to. And we don't want you to just throw money in. If we actually succeed with this, we want you to have some upside. So we're going to give you the opportunity to invest in our company. And we opened up a crowdfunding campaign, and we raised over $10 million in 5 days.
To fund what?
To fund a lawsuit.
To fund the lawsuit.
to
okay.
defend VidAngel.
Wow.
And our idea around the filtering and the original content that we wanted to do. And so we took $5 million to defend ourselves in the lawsuit and $5 million to start original content. But that was the beginning, I think, of pain. There was pain before that, but that was the beginning of severe pain that led us to innovation. And the innovation there was, we have a really strong community here. And I remember Jeff telling me, because he got a call from Daniel, one of my other brothers, one of the other co-founders, and Daniel called and he says, Jeff, what if we leverage the community we're trying to create what they want to see. What if we allow them decide what gets made at Angel?
How do you reach this community? Were they email subscribers?
They were subscribers of the VidAngel service.
Okay,
and
so
they were
via email,
we had a bunch of emails. I think we had just under 400,000 members who were members of this community. And so Daniel's like, what if we allow them to decide what gets made? Now we were thinking, we'll have them come and help us crowdfund all of our TV shows. And we have had them help us crowdfund, TV shows like Dry Bar, The Chosen, the, Tuttle Twins TV show, Sound of Freedom P&A for launching Sound of Freedom and all. And so the crowd has been a catalyst for launching all these different shows and films. But that was the beginning of what we now call the Angel Guild, which was this group of people, these 8,000 investors who invested at Angel, became what we now call the Angel Guild, which is the gatekeepers of Angel content. So that's now evolved over the last, almost 8 years to where we have 300,000 guild members who are basically coming in, and as members, card-carrying members, they get to be the first line of defense as to what gets to come into Angel's ecosystem.
How does one become a member? Is it a minimum contribution?
Yeah, so it's just a monthly membership that they can, either there's a basic membership and a premium membership. The basic allows you to have perks around voting around our content, early access to our content, special live streams, screenings. And then the premium membership allows you to have actually 2 free tickets to every Angel theatrical release. And so these memberships are growing very, very rapidly. But this membership allows for us to take the wisdom of all of our community and say, hey, here's a film. Let's use an example of
Choose
Sound
the
of Freedom.
Chosen.
Or The Chosen.
Because that's the first one.
Yeah, that was the first
I remember.
narrative TV series that we launched. And so The Chosen was an example of the community coming in, and we said, here's a TV show a theoretical concept. They had a pilot episode that Dallas had shot about Christ. What if we go and launch a TV show about Christ? And that community came in and they crowdfunded $10 million to launch the first season of The Chosen. And the rest is history.
Wow.
And so it's this community who tells us before we ever go into production whether a show or film should exist. That is so powerful because one of the issues that we believe Hollywood has is we believe that the gatekeeper model is broken. You have 5 to 10 people in a boardroom who are making multi-hundred million and billion-dollar decisions around content, and they're living in LA, and they're totally disconnected from the rest of the world. And they've finally got to the point where they just admitted, they just said, we just make movies for the 10%. And it's like, we want to make movies for the other 90%. And so this disconnect between them and their audience is becoming so clear now. It wasn't clear back in 2012. We saw it. We're like, they're moving really rapidly in a direction that we don't think is for
very
the
freakish.
culture in the world. It's a scary direction.
Yeah.
And so we kind of saw the writing on the wall, 10, 11 years ago. But now it's become ultra transparent where people are going, holy smokes. The entertainment industry in Hollywood doesn't even remotely align with my values. And so that's all starting to crumble and fall. And it's opening up this incredible window where Angel is now, Dry Bar Comedy has over 100 million viewers worldwide. You look at like Sound of Freedom, top 10 box office. Like there's so much demand for what this type of content is, but it has to be of the quality and standard that the entertainment industry is doing in storytelling. Because what's happened for the last,
how do you do that? Because when I think of content that is faith-based or
cheesy.
Clean, I think of cringe, right? I think of cringe content.
It's
and
very
so
cheesy.
how do you do that? And I've seen your content. It is not cringe. So do you guys make it yourselves? Do you buy it from other people? I have to assume that one of the reasons why some of the content has been cringe, not your content, but general conservative content or faith-based content is cringe, is because money is an issue. So I'm assuming that. So how is your content not cringe at Angel?
I think there's 2 branches to that arm. Money is one of the issues. The other issue is that for the last 50 odd years, you have the entertainment space being built up by people who were willing to invest in something that didn't look like a monetary ROI in the same way that you would expect a business to be. And the conservative right side of the aisle is very capitalist, which I love. That group has looked at everything from the standpoint of I put $1 in, how do I get the most amount of dollars out of that?
Right.
That's a great mentality. You build wealth, you build opportunities for many people, you build jobs. It's powerful. But the entertainment space has it has an ROI from the standpoint of, yes, you can make money, but it doesn't look the same. And it's not usually as big of multipliers as you would see. But there's an ROI around culture that for the last 30 to 40 years, no one on this side of the faith-driven aisle was paying attention to. And so we spent decades falling behind in developing creatives and talent who are values-based and faith-driven. Now, there's a lot of people who are values-based and faith-driven inside of Hollywood. Hollywood's not actually the issue. It's the gatekeepers of Hollywood that are the issue. There are so many filmmakers, as Angel's grown into more prominence, that have come to us that I've been shocked. And I won't say, until we announce which ones they are, but there are many people who are in the process of working with that are A-list type people where it's like, they've been wanting something like this. They've just felt stuck. And so that's one aspect of it, is that we haven't invested in developing creatives who are telling stories at the highest level. One of the things Alejandro Monteverde, the director of Sound of Freedom and Cabrini, constantly says is, we have to, he said, creatives and talent want to work on the best stories, no matter what the message is. That's their DNA. They deeply want to tell incredibly impactful and meaningful stories. And if Hollywood gatekeeps and says, you're only going to tell nihilistic stories that are weird and not the values you want, they're going, okay, well, that's where I can tell the story. And they have that urge so deeply that they'll tell it there. Or there's many people that are super happy if given the right resources and opportunities, that are actually, not aligned values wise. Like there's a lot of people who are involved in the productions of Angels projects that are atheist, agnostic. They don't have the same values, left leaning, liberal side of the aisle. That's fine. They're happy to tell a story that's even conservative or faith driven or values driven, as long as it's a masterpiece and it's the highest level of art. Then they're fine with it. But the gatekeepers are keeping those stories from ever surfacing to the top. And so I think it's a combination of resources and developing the talent in those two spaces. And so we ended up having quite a few decades of pretty cringy content. And people go, well, how does Angel not do that? Well, the Angel Guild is actually one of the key mechanisms that's preventing that from coming out. Because what we've seen is when you go, like if you go to angel.com/guild and you sign up for the guild, or you download the Angel app, you can go into the guild tab and start voting on content, and you'll start seeing that the 300,000+ members who are the gatekeepers for the other 100+ million people who are involved in the Angel ecosystem, those gatekeepers are not voting on cringy content.
Right.
They're telling you exactly what they think. They may go, well, this has a great message, but it's not that good. And that in of itself is pulling out all the, for lack of a better word, propaganda garbage. And by garbage, I don't mean like that Christian content is garbage from the standpoint of the values it's trying to drive, but it's trying to shove something down your throat. And that can be just as distasteful as someone trying to shove woke ideology down your throat. And so that audience by itself, that Angel Guild, is pulling out all that stuff and saying, we don't like this. They're naturally doing it by themselves. We didn't have to go and dictate and say, here's what needs to be made and here's what doesn't need to be made. And so it's a combination of people producing films and TV shows for Angel that they're bringing to us developing projects from the inside out. But both of those paths all lead to the Angel Guild.
And so who chooses what gets to go on to the Angels Guild to begin with?
Anybody can submit to the Angel Guild.
So anybody could make a piece of content and could upload it. And so what if you end up having a woke mob basically on the Angels Guild? So is it possible that in 10, 20 years, I'm sure people ask you this all the time.
Yeah, they do.
What happens if, the people who ran the Olympics freak show, right, decide to go and submit their freak show onto Angels? Is that something that could happen?
Well, the beautiful part is there's two books that are really meaningful. There's a book called The Wisdom of Crowds that we base a lot of the methodology off of. And then there's another one that's called Super Forecasters. We use a combination of those methodologies to prevent gaming in a really powerful way. Because we've actually seen that people tried to do that. And luckily, we've got safeguards and mechanisms in place where we can flag when it's real or not. But it allows us to get to statistical significance as to what the general market actually wants. And so we are absolutely looking at that on a regular basis to make sure that we're not having people try to come hijack that path. But what I'm finding is that Hollywood for years has been pounding DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion and, their woke ideologies. And in theory, diversity, equity, inclusion sounds really, really nice. The problem is mandating it causes a lot of issues. We haven't done any mandating on our content. And His Only Son was a movie that was our first theatrical release. $250,000 film, past Angel Guild, beautiful film. Most of the cast was from the Middle East. Sound of Freedom, the producers and most of the cast was from Mexico and Guatemala. The After Death had a bunch of diverse people that were in that one. The Shift, and then Cabrini was an Italian story, and Sight that just came out was a Chinese story, was with predominantly Chinese cast. The Guild is naturally allowing and wanting diverse stories that are really impactful if they're really well done. It's not about mandating DEI. The audience is causing the most diverse stories to come up just because they're great stories. And Angel doesn't have to do any mandates, and government doesn't have to do any mandates to make that happen. The audience naturally just said, this is a great story. I love this story. I don't care whether it's a Chinese story, an Italian story, a Mexican story. It doesn't matter to me. It's just a great story. I'm drawn to this. So I think people are going to find is that the guild's actually going to be pulling out stories that, like Cabrini was highly critically acclaimed. I didn't think any angel projects would ever be highly critically acclaimed because I don't really care what the critics think, because generally they're off the rails.
Yeah.
I just care what the audience thinks. As long as the audience is rating it high, I'm good. But Cabrini, Sight, Sound of Hope, they're all getting critically acclaimed. And that audience that wants this type of content, the left-leaning content, is loving the content as well. Because it's great storytelling. Yeah. It's telling diverse stories. Sound of Hope is basically an all-black story.
Right.
It's a beautiful story about a community who did something incredible. And so we don't need to go through and actually like mandate what happens. Let the community tell us what are great stories and what needs to come out. And there are lots of great stories that are horrible storytelling. They didn't do a good job of it. And those won't belong at Angel. And the audience the guild will tell us that. And so to your point, we're constantly monitoring for people trying to hijack the system. But the Angel Guild is probably the single most important thing that an individual can do right now to influence culture with just a small membership and a small participation of voting on what should come next to Angel. That could have a larger influence than almost any other thing an individual can do on the culture for the next 20 years.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because the influencing of culture has seemed to be something that was more of a focus of the left. And they've also been more focused on education in that way, where the right, is more like, okay, live and let people do whatever they want to do, where, the left, they're activists in their nature. And so we have seen, when you talk about this issue of why did we make cringe movies? And that was because, for us, the ROI on making these movies was not really about influencing culture. It was about, okay, shoving the message down people's throats and not necessarily fully investing in the art of it, right? Because understanding that it's really an art is what's going to influence culture. And I see that, by the way, at PragerU as well, where, many of our donors, it's like, okay, if the content is not necessarily the king, right? It's more about the message rather than content. We say, no, it has to be both the content and the marketing. It can't just be about the message. It's about the entire picture, right? And so I have seen that even living in PragerU world and PragerU existence, especially if it's about doing good, they immediately think about it as charity. And charity means paying less to the staff, right? It's like, oh, well, if it's charitable, let's pay less money. But if we're doing something bad, let's pay more money. I'm like, something makes no sense here, right? It's like, most things in capitalism make a lot of sense to me, but this part of doing good is a version of ROI as well, right? And so if you think about it in those terms, and I can relate to that on the angel side, but I would also say that if it's all based on the consumers giving the direction for what culture you're shaping through your content, then it's really important that you get a consumer that's really willing to invest in good things, right? And so you almost need to create a shift in the consumer's mind to understand that they need to take the first steps, right? They need to care. They need to go out of their way and want to impact culture, right? This is not a conservative way of thinking, wanting to impact culture. The conservatives generally think about, impacting their homes, right? And their communities, right? As opposed to, I want to go out of my way to impact culture. I'm going to go and vote and think about it in those terms. And so it's quite a shift in the perspective of both of our audiences. And I'm curious also, how do you market to this audience? How do you market this message, which I said, but also how do you market in general, where you don't have the millions of dollars that Hollywood has to erect signs and ad buys, et cetera. So you talk about these very large numbers, right? I remember The Chosen. I can't remember the numbers. I'm sure you do.
Said hundreds of millions and
hundreds of millions of people.
Viewers.
How do you get to all these people without the budget that Hollywood has?
Yeah, our background was originally business and marketing. And so, for example, like I said, I started a DIY home security company that we built to a really great scale nationally. My brother started an agency called Harmon Brothers. So a lot like the Harmon Brothers agency, a lot of people are familiar with its work. They're not familiar with the name of it, but if you've seen like Squatty Potty commercials or Poopery commercials or the Purple Mattress commercials that kind of blew up and made these billion-dollar companies, that was the Harmon Brothers agency. And so our background was more the marketing side. And because we did so many like kind of weird, sales things when we were kids, like I was selling door-to-door potatoes at 10 years old. So I learned how to like communicate and get someone to say, hey, I want your product. And so we kind of leaned into this really a scrappy bootstrapping way of marketing where you spend $1, you go get $2, $3, $4, $5 back. And then you allow yourself to scale up in an efficient and calculated way versus just spending gobs of money, hoping something hits the fan, and then seeing an occasional return. That's why 80% of films in Hollywood fail. 80% of films in Hollywood do not make a return. We think we can flip that on its head. So if you look at our first year of theatrical, for example, his only son paid back its marketing, P&A investors is what we call it, and its investors in its equity. Sound of Freedom did the same thing. After Death looks like it's going to do the same thing. The Shift looks like it's going to do the same thing. Those first 4 films, we're hitting 90-something%, and it's because the audience has already told us that they're going to love the product. Mm-hmm. All of our films are rating in the high 80s to 90s on the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes because we know that the Guild's already told us what the score is going to be. And so we're very data-driven and calculated in how we market and leverage a dollar so that we're doing it way more efficiently. People are always, I remember when His Only Son launched, we had John Irwin's a good friend of ours who is at Wonder and he's doing a series for Amazon and a bunch of other stuff. Very talented director of Jesus Revolution. He reached out to us and he said, how did you guys get in the top 3 of the box office? How much did you spend on marketing? And we're like, oh, well, we crowdfunded the $1.235 million from the Angel Guild. And then we spent a little bit more on top of that. So it was, probably a little over $2 million on marketing to get a $12 million box office. He's like, I've never broken in the top 3 in the box office. He's like, without spending $15 million through Lionsgate. Like it had never happened for him. And so we are very calculated in how we do that. And so that's one of our skill sets that we've developed over the last, 15 to 20 years as in our careers as brothers. And so that's something we actually know really well. Mm-hmm. We know marketing and distribution quite well. But the film and entertainment space is something we don't know as well. And so we decided, hey, you know what? Let's just have the Angel Guild pick what we should distribute and market out into the world. And then we don't have to guess. We already know it's going to be good. And so that part of it's actually an easier calculation for us. But the Guild is the beginning of every project at Angel. And what I mean by that is it greenlights the project. And then it also helps fund the P&A or the marketing for a film that goes into theaters. If you look at Sound of Hope, they raised almost $3 million or over $3 million from the Guild to market Sound of Hope in theaters. Mm-hmm. And that created a grassroots movement that allowed us to do over $10 million in the box office. One of the big studios that everybody raves about in Hollywood is A24. And they, I think a recent thing I saw was less than 19% of their films do over 10 million in the box office. And we have 90% of our films doing over 10 million in the box office. And they reached out to us one time and just said, how are you guys doing this? We're like, well, we take our marketing dollars and we spend it on people we think will buy tickets. And then we have them watch the movie. And they're like, what? It's like, this isn't rocket science. But Hollywood's had so many years of fat that's allowed them to spend and pat each other's pockets through P&A and pat each other's pockets through production and through distribution. So everybody's making money up and down the line. And the people at the end of the line, which is the investors, are kind of left holding the bag. Yeah. And so Angel wants to flip that on its head and say, let's worry about that last dollar. Let's care about the last dollar and make sure all the dollars before are super efficient. That's why you're going to see Angel films that look like, for example, Cabrini, people were like, this looks like $100 million film. It was done for way less than that. Right. And then Sound of Freedom, a lot of people were like, this looks like a $30, $40, $50 million film. It was done for less than 15 because our production partners are putting all the money on the screen. And then Angel's model is allowing for when we win, if we win together, you're going to get the profits just alongside of us. It's not going to be like traditional studios where they're taking their distribution fee and they're taking their fees on marketing and all these different fees. And then there's nothing left on the bottom. And that's caused, because distributors are doing that, the big studios, that's caused all the production studios to say, well, now we've got to inflate all of our production costs because that's the only time we're ever going to make money is on our production fees. And now you have episodes of a TV show costing $15 to $20 million. Wow. That's insane.
Right.
Where's all that money going? It's not going onto the screen.
Right.
And so there's a recalibration that's happening where they are so bloated and so fat heavy that the audience isn't resonating with the stories they're telling. And so they're kind of this big tree timbering down.
Yeah, what an opportunity.
And we have an incredible opportunity to capture that.
What's so interesting about it is, number one, oftentimes when you have less, you can actually do more because you become so much more efficient. But the other thing is you can't help but wonder whether they come up with these insane fees to make things in order to create a barrier to entry so that people like you or PragerU and Daily Wire feel intimidated from entering the game, because you would
100%.
say, well, I can't spend $20 million on an episode, so why even compete? Why even try, right? And so hearing from you that things can be done if you trim them down and you trim out the fat is actually quite inspiring, and I think is an opportunity for an entire industry to grow and realize that not everything has to be that expensive and it can still be really good.
The production budgets are broken into two things. There's hard costs, which are the costs of like equipment, the production set. Those are costs that have to be incurred.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's soft costs. What people don't realize is there's hard costs and then there's soft costs, which are all the people who are getting their money. You know, all the producers. You'll see it on a film. There will be 5 producers.
Right.
And yes, there are 5 producers, but maybe if you can help them all understand and if you have an incentive structure, because one of the things that I had a mentor tell me, his name was Matthew Harris, who's a good friend of mine. He said, systems are perfectly designed to get their results. And when you look at incentive structures, that's the key to figure out the problem. If you see a problem, go find the incentive structure that causes the problem. Fix that, you fix the problem.
Sure.
And that's what's
Take
happening
that into politics as well.
100%. And that's the same thing that's happened. That's why I say, you want to fix a lot of politics, you should have politicians start wearing, NASCAR jackets of all their sponsors, right? Because then all of a sudden you see the incentive structure and you go, oh, okay, fix that problem, fix the downstream. Right. And the same thing goes for entertainment. And so once you fix the incentive structure where Angel is actually paying considerable profits, the majority of the profits to the producers and their investors when we actually win together, once people understand that that's real, that's why we actually published on our blog the breakdown of all of Sound of Freedom's $250 million box office. How much went to marketing? How much went to taxes? How much went to costs? How much we sent to the filmmakers? How much Angel made? Like, no studio does that.
You're right. It's true. By the way, in preparation for today, I was like, wow, this is incredibly transparent. I know your entire P&L.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No studio does that because there's so many soft costs that are hidden both on the production and the distribution side that's causing the cost to be super inflated. But once the producers understand that there's a studio, when it wins, you'll win with it in a massive way where we're sending hundreds of millions of dollars to our filmmaker partners. Then all of a sudden they go, I literally had someone come in and pitch me a TV show. I said, well, what's the production cost going to be? He goes, I think I could do this for like $40+ million. And then I walked him through our entire model and how we don't take distribution fees and how we just cover our costs. And then majority of profits go to them and some come to Angel. By the end of the meeting, he was like, I think I could do it for like 11 or 10 million.
Nice.
And I was like, holy smokes, your budget just went from 40 million to $10 million. That's the problem. Yeah. You got to solve that incentive alignment issue, and then you solve the downstream problem.
You've done also very well in international markets. So can you share some of that?
Yeah. So the obviously Dry Bar and The Chosen branched us into massive international markets. We have over 100 and something partners internationally, and distribution partners all over the world. And so we've got a footprint in most every country. Sound of Freedom obviously blew up into a massive scale where it did, I think, almost $60 or $70 million internationally. And
like
so that was,
where?
It did a lot in Mexico and Brazil, Italy. Didn't do as well in the UK. I think the UK, for some reason, doesn't love all of our titles yet. But I think we'll kind of warm up to them. They look at Angel in a certain light, and UK as not super faith-based stuff. But I think people will start realizing more and more that Angel is faith-friendly, but there's a lot of content that will not be exactly faith-based content. It'll just be exceptional stories that have great values. And so we've been building out an international footprint and have actually hired an entire international team that is branching into all these different regions around the world, because our goal is not to, build up Angel and then just sell it off somewhere. Our goal is to become, with an asterisk, the next Disney. Like, we want to become the family viewing experience for the world. And so we have very lofty goals, and so we're trying to build the entire infrastructure that allow us to accomplish that.
Do you dub or translate the content?
Entire dubbing team led by Luis, a guy on our team who's from Brazil, and so we dub into literally over a dozen languages, and subtitles in dozens of languages. And so it's a massive effort, one that a lot of people don't really understand the magnitude of it, but we've got to influence every aspect of the world to kind of bring them towards allowing the type of content that, again, it's not just the United States. There are other countries around the world that are on the precipice of really something meaningful or pivotal, that they could go one direction or another. And so we think that our content can kind of help influence that in a meaningful way.
Is AI helpful in any of the dubbing?
AI is going to be so powerful in so many ways from the standpoint of not just dubbing, but there's so many aspects of the film process that it can be a tool for the filmmakers to make them more efficient and enhance their abilities. And so it absolutely has impact in there. We just had a clip go super viral on Teletwins that was dubbed into Spanish, and it's getting over 100,000 views an hour right now. It's just blowing up. And so, we're definitely going to be branching into all these different markets around the world.
What about the market in China? Are you able to make it into China?
China's an interesting beast because if you actually, there's a funny article that I read that showed like all the posters of the United States and then the same from Hollywood and then the same posters in China. And you see them side by side and you're like, wow, okay, Hollywood's really principled about its DEI stuff until it comes to China. And then they're like removing all the black people from the Chinese posters, removing all the like.
Then they're just principled about making money, right?
That's exactly right. It's like, ooh, we could care less about all these things we're saying. China has a really interesting market because the communist government gets to control everything that comes in there. And so we personally haven't had any films. We almost had Sound of Freedom go into China, and then it got stonewalled at the very, very, like it literally went through all the steps and processes to be one of the few American films that goes into China. And at the very end, it got stonewalled. But it was just funny, the requests they made, like little dialogue changes that had to happen. They wanted us to change the title. They said, you can't have the word freedom in a movie title.
I mean, that is...
It's a little bit crazy. It is crazy to think that they have that much control over what the brain space of their culture is. But China is the epitome of what a communist environment's going to look like. And so them saying, oh, Sound of Freedom, we think this is an interesting story. And I actually believe the only reason they entertained it, this is my theory, the reason they got so far down the path, maybe I shouldn't say this. No, I'm going to say it.
Say it. We want to know.
I think the only reason they got that far down the path is at the end of Sound of Freedom, it has those cards that come up and it talks about child trafficking and the problem that it is. And it says, America's one of the top consumers of child trafficking. Not the number one of the top consumers of child trafficking. And I think China loves
They like that.
that
they
was
like
on
that
the
dig on
yeah,
the
it's
US.
like, oh, the U.S. is one of the top. Now, we didn't say this. China's right there.
Yeah.
If it had said that, it would have never even entertained it. But I actually think that they looked at that as like almost that because of that one line, they could almost twist that as like an anti-American movie when it's not at all. Like there's America's one of the top consumers of child sex trafficking. Right. So I think that could have played a piece into their decision of like it literally got to the very final stages, and it's an arduous process to get greenlit in China to get into theatrical distribution, but there's billions of dollars there. And so Hollywood will cater and craft every message from the scripting process all the way to the end to make sure that a film is kosher to the Chinese Communist Party.
Have you had any visibility now that you're working with international markets into how China is trying to impact our culture here in the United States? I know you talk about what goes into China, but what about what China is doing here on our culture?
I think the way that China influences our culture is more subtle than what people realize. The subtleties live within. You'll have a movie that comes out, and the movie, through the scripting and casting process, because China's made it very clear, here are the marks that we need to see for a movie to even be considered for China. They basically got this like undisclosed template of, here's what you need in your movie to be considered for Chinese distribution. And Hollywood knows those requirements. And so just by having those and having billions of dollars of value in that market, Hollywood takes that and says, now how do we make every movie to where it follows what the Chinese Communist Party wants so that we can act? And so they are indirectly influencing the culture that way, whether we like it or not.
They know what the expectations are. And so they have their DEI list, they have their China list, they have all their,
there's just like
leftist,
the anti-diversity,
Marxist
equity,
list.
inclusion
Right.
list.
There's like the amount of lists. I'm like, no wonder you guys are so successful. All you have to do is just do the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's that's the beautiful part about the Angel Guild is the audience can just tell us whether they love the story or they don't love the story. Like Sight, for example, great film about a Chinese immigrant that comes over and creates this incredible procedure that allows for millions to have sight around the world. But that movie will never go to China because it's about the Cultural Revolution and what happened there. And China will never allow, even though that movie is, I think almost 50% of the movie's in Chinese with subtitles in English. It is a super incredibly diverse movie for the word that they use. And really powerful, but it doesn't check the boxes that the Chinese government wants. So anyway, it's a fascinating process and dynamic. But for Angel, we've got our show, the Twins TV show, which is, that kid show about freedom and economics. And the reality is we're fully anticipating that at some point we're just going to be banned from China altogether. So they won't even entertain us.
Probably after this episode, it's done. You're done.
Right.
Bye-bye, China. I don't know how to say it in Chinese, but we should probably learn the language.
That's right. That's right.
What are your thoughts on indoctrination? And so people ask me this question all the time. Should content have an ideological bent to it, right? Is it okay if a content maker, has an agenda? And oftentimes they'll use the term indoctrination. And we use the term indoctrination when we talk about Hollywood, saying we feel like they're indoctrinating the culture with negative ideas and et cetera. And so much of your content is faith-based. And I understand that your audience has voted for it. But with that said, do you get that kind of pushback and saying, Angel Studios is indoctrinating the public?
Well, the beautiful thing is it's the Angel Guild that greenlights everything. So Angel Studios doesn't decide on whether I can't just go circumvent that system and say, I want this because it has this message. The Angel Guild has to tell me that it's worthy of the story. And for us, it's story first, message second. For a long time, it's been message first, story second. And that's fine for some audiences if you're going to preach to the choir. Like those are great sermons, but that's not the type of storytelling we're really interested in. We want to tell exceptional stories that have great values in them. Like our North Star, we say Angel is to tell stories that amplify light. And we define light as anything that is true, honest, noble, authentic, admirable, excellent. Those principles, those are the principles that the Guild gets to look through the lens of and say, does this story, is it telling true principles? Because I think indoctrination is kind of an interesting word because in my mind, people look at the Twins TV show that we have and they go, that's indoctrination. Like, sure, I guess you could classify as indoctrination, but we're not hiding what it is. We know Twins is a show and we tell the entire audience about freedom and economics. And if you don't want your kids to learn about freedom and economics, don't have them watch Twins because that's what it is.
So you're saying at least you're transparent about it. At least you're clear about what the value proposition
100%.
is. 100%.
But a lot of our stories are going to fall into the camp of great stories that just tell true principles because there are universal true principles. We know killing is bad. We know that being honest is good. Being deceptive is not. And one of the things that happens so often, and matter of fact, I was on a podcast with Zuby, a dear friend of ours. He's awesome. He asked, what's the line on indoctrination? He articulated this really, really well. He said, the line for me is, does it try to make good look evil and evil look good? And if the answer is yes, that can't come into my home. And I was like, that's a really good way of articulating it because you can have some really heavy topics in a film. Sound of Freedom's not an easy topic.
Yeah.
You're talking about child sex trafficking. But as long as you make good and evil evil, then the story can go into really dark and difficult places and have redemptive story arcs in a really meaningful way that the audience will accept and embrace. That's really, really interesting. And so, but there has to be great storytelling, incredible visuals, artistically sound. And then you can have messages built into those based on what the artists want to do, but the guild gets to decide that. That's the beauty of Angel, is the Angel Guild gets to decide whether this message, which again, if you watch Angel's marketing, it's never about the message. It's always about the entertainment quality.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do really well. Entertain people in a really powerful way. And then they walk out feeling inspired, uplifted, excited about the world and life. I remember a review that came into our app one time. It says, Angel Studios, the only streaming service that leaves you better than it found you. And I was like, I love that.
Yeah.
That's exactly the type of impact we want to have.
You talk about good versus evil and the importance of, not necessarily platforming evil, right? So that requires a level of discernment, right? And we are living in an era where discernment is completely upside down. Like people are worshiping evil.
Yeah, they are.
And are mocking good. What informs you? What is your direction for what is good and what is evil? And how do you expect your guild to be able to have that discernment of what is good versus evil?
So for me personally, I grew up with, a certain set of values as a Christian and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that are just distilled in me, whether, I've ingrained those into every part of me. I love studying the scriptures. I love studying and praying, and that's a huge part of my family and my life. And so that's always going to be my North Star. Not everybody in the guild has that same North Star. Everybody has their different experiences, but I think that God made us in a way that even if someone doesn't believe in him, they don't know 100% why, but their soul yearns for goodness and to do good for the world. Now, we've distanced ourselves. So many people have distanced themselves so far from truth that, to your point, good is now evil and evil is now good. And the satanic, demonic type things that are happening in the world are very disturbing, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what I mean by that is the fringe of entertainment 10, 15, 20 years ago, the really hard R's, the TVMAs, those weren't like the huge pieces of entertainment back in the day. They were actually usually revenue losers. The most of the money was made in the PG and PG-13 realm. And Hollywood kept making those. Matter of fact, I think it was over 70% of films back in the early 2000s, even though they weren't making less than 20% of the revenues, were rated R movies. Why were they making those? Because they were gradually trickling more and more people into that camp. And they were gradually pulling more and more people into a good is evil and evil is good type camp. And so we have a very short window of opportunity as a world, and specifically the United States, to rally around making good great again. And what I mean by making good great again is you have to tell the story as well as the devil's telling his stories. Otherwise, people are going to go to the more entertaining story. And he's going to influence culture the way he wants, and God's going to influence the culture the way he wants. And that's why I say becoming a member of the Angel Guild is one of the key components that can allow us to shift culture back into the direction of distinguishing what is good and what is evil. And so the discernment of each individual in the guild is going to be large. That's why we have a membership. That's why it's not just anybody can come vote. We want people to come in and actually put their money where their mouth is to have influence. They can't just say, yeah, I'm just going to vote and hijack this process. It would be very difficult for someone to go spend a ton of money and actually hijack the process at this point. And so the discernment of each individual guild member is these are the super fans of Sound of Freedom, of His Only Son, of Cabrini, of Tuttle Twins, of The Chosen, these are the fans of all of our different, films, dry bar comedy, our shows, and they are the ones who are getting to decide what gets made. And we've got to build that community up as big as physically possible, as quickly as possible, because there will become a turning point where more people are voting for evil than are voting for good. And once that happens, then you've lost. And and society deteriorates and crumbles. And so we have this window of opportunity. I don't know how long it is, where we can make it to where the greatest stories that are being told are stories for good. But that window could close very quickly if people don't rally behind wanting to influence culture in this way.
It's exactly how we feel here at PragerU. We feel like right now is the time to put your foot on the gas, because we still have enough people who understand what good looks like and what evil looks like.
I still believe the majority of people.
If
you go talk to the majority of people, liberal Democrats, conservative Republicans, I've interacted with both because I've been in the entertainment space now for 10 years and I've seen both. And there are people with exceptional values on the left who are just confused and don't know what the options are. And they obviously have their different ideological ideas around how government should be run that I disagree with. But that being said, they are still good people.
Right.
They know that killing is bad and that, you should do X, Y, Z. Like a lot of them, I saw a study that said it was like high 70s, 80% of people were looking at all the trans stuff that's happening going, this is not good. Right. That's left and right. That's bipartisan. People are just like, this is out there. This is not what they represented to us as what this movement was supposed to be about. And so I still think that the majority of people are there. It's just a very silent majority.
Right.
And
fearful.
And giving them a mechanism in their own home where they can sign up for the Angel Guild and influence in their home something. There was 1,000 people who voted for Sound of Freedom. Like Fox had greenlit it.
Yeah.
Then Fox got bought by Disney. Disney shelves it for whatever reason. Then it gets finally pulled out of Disney by Eduardo Verástegui. And then he goes and tries to find distribution. No one will pick it up. And the guild watches it and they go, this is amazing.
Yeah.
You have to get this out. 1,000 people said, this should exist. We take a random sampling of our guild and they said, this should exist. And because of those 1,000 people, there's now almost 100 million people who have seen Sound of Freedom around the world.
Right.
And it's influenced legislation and culture. And that 1,000 people, that membership can be the difference between a film that ends up in the top 10 of the box office and influencing the discussion around the entire globe, or us being silent. That small little gesture.
Such an amazing feeling to know that while witnessing evil, you can still do something about it. Because there are, as you're saying, there are a lot of people who are witnessing evil. There are a lot of people who don't like what they're seeing, but they keep thinking that there's nothing they can do. And that is not true. There's always something you can do, right? You become part of the Angel Guild. You can join PragerU.
Exactly.
You can show better, cleaner content to your children. You can engage in the fight. And what evil will try to do to you is make you think like the barrier to entry is too high, right? The cost is too high. You should be fearful. And I think
your voice doesn't matter.
Your voice doesn't matter. You don't matter. You're crazy. You're alone, right? All of that stuff that we've been hearing for so long. And they've done that in the world of education. And so, we've definitely dealt with a lot of that kind of leftist Marxist type of indoctrination in the schools. And so being able to just go into entertainment and be able to just shed it off is so important. And politics, voting, everything that we're dealing with right now, all the decision making, at the end of the day, it's downstream from culture.
That's exactly right.
And so, what you guys are doing is so incredible. I just want to end with one final question. You've done so much, right? From The Chosen to The Sound of Freedom to Sound of Hope that just came out, and you have some future content that's coming out. If you had to say what is the thing you're proud of the most with Angels, what would it be?
I think I'm very proud of the fact that every one of our projects gets the highest audience scores that you can see. All of our films are getting audience scores in the 90s. And all of our TV shows are getting super high audience scores. And you look at the upcoming films that are coming. Bonhoeffer in Thanksgiving going to be in theaters. And Homestead, which is a post-apocalyptic film leading into a TV show that very much has faith and values integrated. Instead of being nihilistic at the end when the world's coming to an end, people are trying to rally together to figure out how to solve the problems and things that are happening. And so you can tell all those same stories with a different tone. And so I'm most proud about how the Angel Guild picks winners and that the audience has a beat on what should come out into the world and what shouldn't. What I don't want to do is I don't want Angel to just become the new gatekeepers. I don't want myself or my brothers or the executives of Angel to just become the new gatekeepers of what we believe the world should look like. That wouldn't be innovative at all. That would just be becoming Hollywood 2.0. And in one generation, that can fall away. In less than a generation, we could, what if we end up transitioning away in 10, 15 years and there's other executives come in and they're now the gatekeepers and what are their ideas? Whereas if we build a system that allows for the Angel Guild to show that it's the best system for selecting content, then you're safeguarding the culture in a really, really powerful way with the audience. So I'm most proud of that. And I appreciate partners like PragerU and, Daily Wire and all these different people who are rallying behind trying to create these stories together and to get them out into the world in a meaningful way, because there's so much desire to try to, for different people and egos to try to say, hey, we want to be the top thing or whatever it may be. It doesn't matter. We have to rally together as communities and organizations to even remotely compete with what's happening on the other side, because they have so many resources and so many things. And so grateful for you, grateful for all you guys are doing and how you're impacting the world.
Well, I'm proud to call you a friend. Thank you for all you're doing. This was a great start and only a start to our partnership and our relationship. So thanks for coming to PragerU. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.